Thank you. I'm honored to be here. I'm sorry I can't just tell you stories, but I have a very carefully scripted, statesman-like brief that insults nobody. My Q&A record is 8 hours and 1 minute, set at Hackers on Planet Earth in 2010. So what I will tell you is I'm going to give you a scripted brief which is available online with the words in notes format. I'm not going to read the brief. I'm just going to give you an extemporaneous version of it. You'll be able to study it in detail. This is 25 years worth of knowledge packed into 40 minutes. And I will make you a promise. I will answer all the emails you send me. Okay? And I would be very pleased if we could build up a body of email answers that I can then post as a reference. All right? I stand before you as a failure. I started this fight in 1988. And the reason this is titled OSINT Done Right is because we're not doing it right. We have good people trapped in a bad system. And on a quick note, there are 3 old guys in OSINT, 2 of whom are in the room. One is there, I'm here, and Arno Reuser in the Netherlands is the other real pioneer from the 1980s. He's crazier than I am. This is the plan for the brief, and I'm going to go very quickly. But I want to emphasize, and this is very serious, General Tony Zinni has said, when he was commander of CENTCOM, he got at best 4% of what he needed from secret sources and methods. We demean, ignore, and underfund OSINT at our own risk. OSINT is human, not tech-int. And 80% of OSINT demands that we outsource it to individuals who don't have clearances, are not citizens, and generally don't like us. Alvin Toffler helped me create this slide. We were coming back from a lunch together at DIA, and he made the comment, they're stuck in their little green box. And in that instant, I realized we had all these other boxes that we needed to bring together. OSINT is about harvesting all of the relevant information, not just what you can find under the streetlight when you're a drunk looking for your keys. My first book was entitled On Intelligence, Spies, and Secrecy in an Open World. My first 2 books had forewords by US senators that were chairman of the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence. I was famous and talked about as a future director of national intelligence until all of a sudden people realized that my ideas would cut their budget in half. And that was the end of me. Okay? The good news is now I think everyone's starting to see we're over the cliff and in free fall. Maybe it's time to consider some of these good ideas. Because by the way, my second book predicted all of these illegal immigrants. Figure 25 in my second book shows the illegal immigrant surge coming up. Now, although I started this fight, I really want to emphasize that what I've done for 25 years is aggregated the good ideas from other people. I've tried to both inspire and learn from. Lieutenant Colonel Gary Beaver, the US Army, gave me this concept. This is how he used OSINT in Bosnia. The key point here is that OSINT is a buffer of welcome for NGOs, police, local nationals, and so forth. It's the way in which you create a sharing buffer in which you can give and they can give. One of the problems we still have today in the United States of America is that the NGOs will come in and brief DIA and they'll give them everything and then they'll say, well, what can you tell us? And DIA will say, I'm sorry, it's classified. All right? That is not an acceptable answer in today's world. As war has grown more complex, intelligence has failed to adapt. The CIA is killing 98% innocents with drones. Our intelligence system cannot keep up with a mobile, non-traditional enemy on a very broad battlefield. We literally cannot support moving artillery fires in a fast-moving situation. And we need to realize, and I just read a book, Connectography, we need to realize that the Chinese are beating us by building roads and ports and high-speed rail, and that the military, as it is used by the United States and NATO, is now a dysfunctional non-solution. It's time the Nordics led intelligence for peace, and that's why I'm so honored to be invited here, because I think you have the power to change the world. This is my latest depiction of where we are and where we need to go. There isn't a presidential candidate today who can recite from memory, as I can, the 10 high-level threats to humanity that were identified by the UN High-Level Threat Panel in 2004. Poverty, infectious disease, environmental degradation, interstate conflict, civil war, genocide, other atrocities, proliferation, terrorism, and transnational crime. The Western intelligence system is focused on war and terrorism, which is of our own making. We are creating the terrorists by doing elective military invasions, predatory capitalism by Goldman Sachs and others. This makes no sense at all. And anyone in Europe who fails to stop these things is complicit in creating the terrorist problem and the illegal immigrant problem. So I humbly suggest to you, you have the power to create a Nordic or a Scandinavian. In Norway, I learned the difference. You have the power to create a Nordic or a Scandinavian intelligence center that can be a golden beacon of truth, that is absolutely incapable of telling a lie to anyone. And that will produce infinite wealth on this planet. So, as you can imagine, we're kind of down here under open source. We haven't gotten multinational yet. We haven't gotten to a world brain. I know exactly how to do that, but like Archimedes, I have no place to plant my lever. A waterfront warehouse in Copenhagen would do nicely. I was honored in 1997 to brief General Schumacher. He got it in 5 minutes. He stopped my 10-minute briefing. He turned to the desync. He said, I want a J-23, which is the OSINT branch, which is now gone, and I want OSINT taught in every schoolhouse. Ben Harrison, a man I deeply admire who is still in government service, he forced everyone to put their requirements in the Coliseum. Within 1 year, he was able to demonstrate to General Schumacher that with 22 people for $5 million a year, he was answering 40% of all special operations EEIs worldwide coming into the all-source system. 5 million, 40%. Secret intelligence world, 4%. What part of this are we not understanding? It's the part that gives money to contractors and politicians. So that's the obstacle to change. OSINT is relevant at all 4 levels. It's simply relevant in different ways at all 4 levels. And I understand, well, I give you the links at the end to, among other things, the SOF OSINT handbook. It was my privilege to be asked to come to the Marine Corps as the 2nd ranking civilian in Marine Corps intelligence in 1988. One of the things I noticed immediately is nobody has a strategic analytic model. They're just collecting open source information willy-nilly, either like the drunk looking for their keys under the light, whatever happens to be on the internet, which, oh, by the way, is less than 2% of the relevant information. I work in 183 languages, if I have to, and I work in 33 languages normally. So I think a first challenge is to actually get your command to agree on what does it need to know at the 4 levels of analysis: strategic, operational, tactical, and technical, across all of the dimensions, not just the military combat dimensions, but civil society and geographic conditions. We build aircraft to an aviation day that is warm and not humid. The actual aviation day is hot and humid. This means that an aircraft can carry half as much, half as far, and loiter half as long. We build the M1A1, which is useful in exactly 6 countries. It is a very heavy, very expensive piece of equipment designed to reach out 3,000 meters with precision. It invented the concept of gallons per mile. It also displaces an entire truck company when we try and move it in a ship. The actual line of sight distance around the world is under 900 meters. If you're over-investing in Western technology being pushed on you by the Americans, you are making a big mistake, okay? So you need your own intelligence center, and you need your own focus on acquisition and combined arms. Stop buying stuff from snake oil salesmen. Now, I was blessed. I was a ghostwriter for the Commandant of the Marine Corps for a while. I wrote the single best line in my life that's still being used as a signature line for him. He was explaining to Congress why the Marines were the only ones that had communications and intelligence under the same general. And he said, because communications without intelligence is noise, and intelligence without communications is irrelevant. Okay? We still haven't learned that. And oh, by the way, Navy captains today are being taught how to use a sextant, and Army officers are relearning land navigation because someone has finally figured out that Chinese can take out our GPS any day they want. Okay? It's time we get serious. I pointed out in my article for General Gray that the non-state actor in the emerging threat was the threat of the future. And I pointed out that we needed to use intelligence not only to address the emerging threat, but also to make a case for peaceful preventive measures. I was in Norway 2 days ago, and we were talking about the disconnect between the Norwegian ambitions to have peace in the world and their very active participation in US military planning and equipping. Now, the Arctic needs to become a demilitarized zone. We should not be allowing the Russians and the Americans to have military exercises there, including exercises that lead to the occasional loss of aircraft, by accident, of course. This is very serious. So this is the contrast that I did. It's still not appreciated. I'm just teasing you with this slide. I did my first graduate thesis on predicting revolution. There in red are all of the preconditions of revolution that exist in the United States of America today. Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders represent a very angry majority on both sides of the polarized public. And I give you a tiny URL. I think this is worth study because these 2 million illegal immigrants that are hurting Europe and will come to Norway. If we don't pay attention to the ideas that we're trying to communicate in this course and in this class, you will be dealing with 20 million illegal refugees within 5 to 10 years. It's time we got serious about not doing bad things everywhere else. I'll glance over this very quickly. It's a cultural intelligence slide. I am just very sad at the decline in the American educational system and the inability of our analysts to think culturally or in other languages. The key point of this slide is that the center of gravity for doing intelligence relevant to the future is in the private sector, not in the government. It's the private sector that's the primary actor. So when we're creating standards, as well we should for NATO and others, what we really should be doing is creating standards that impact on the private sector's ability to do OSINT that we can use. We are steering the rowboat, not rowing the rowboat. The private sector has to be made a virtual extension of what we do, but that's not happening today. There are 4 major belligerent groups. And this is, again, old stuff. I was talking to Win Schwartau. He and I and Jim Anderson, the senior security engineer at NSA, and one other person, signed a letter to the White House in 1994 warning about cybersecurity. And Wynn told me the other day that a year ago he gave a briefing that everybody absolutely loved. And at the end of the briefing he said, I did this briefing in 1994. Okay? Now, after our letter to the White House, NSA decided, rather than protecting communications and computing, which it was charged with, it decided to co-conspire with CEOs in the US and compromise every US computing and communication system. Now, this is not unique to the United States. The French, the Germans, the Russians, the Chinese, and the Israelis all do this. If you have not built your own computer and communication system with open source code, it is, I absolutely guarantee you, compromised. Okay? We need to get serious. Homeland defense is vastly more important today. And one of the things that troubles me is that we haven't really come to grips on understanding our vulnerabilities in each of these areas. Now, there's a problem with underinvestment in physical infrastructure. That's certainly a problem we have in the United States. It may not be a problem you have. One of the things I learned when I was doing studies for the Marine Corps is I could keep the Marine Corps from leaving town by turning off their lights. All Marine Corps bases from which we launch forces to deploy are reliant on private sector power and water. They don't know where the flashlights are because they're used to living in a peacetime garrison environment. It's time we get serious. And public health. Public health is huge. One of the things people don't realize, there's this concern about wheat and gluten or whatever. My mother's a maniac about eating healthy. It hasn't been handed down to the generations. But I mean, she's eat healthy for your blood type. Wheat is dangerous today in the United States because right before it's harvested, it's sprayed with Roundup, a pesticide, in order to dry it out so that there will be less wear and tear on the machines. Now, it should be a clue to you that the beer industry, a very important industry, refuses any wheat that has had Roundup applied. And the pea and lentil industries do also. Now, I think the Nordics have been somewhat ahead of the game in refusing GMOs, but I think you can do more. I think it's absolutely essential that we really look at all of this. Now, I did a seminal article on the utility of open sources in relation to those 10 high-level threats, and this is what I published. And I think it's pretty accurate. OSINT is essentially 80 to 95% of the solution. And very candidly, at my age, 63, what I don't know from OSINT, I can probably guess faster, better, cheaper than any possible combination of expensive US secret capabilities. We don't need those secret capabilities. I had dinner with a SIGINT analyst the other day who's now retired. And I asked them, I said, in your entire career, have you ever had a single signals intercept that was worth $10 billion a year? The answer was no. Okay? It's time we get serious. Now, I'm pleased to see myself quoted by the two prior speakers, whom I therefore have to say I absolutely embrace everything they said. They're correct in every possible respect. And I also notice that they're more diplomatic than I am, but they're saying the same thing. We haven't made much progress. All right? And I don't expect much progress from the United States, from NATO, or from the United Nations. There is a need for a seed crystal. And I think that seed crystal is here in Copenhagen. And whether it's a Nordic intelligence center or a Scandinavian intelligence center, I mean, Nordic does include Iceland as well as the Finns, so maybe there's some good things there. I think we need to really think big. I mean, even include the Canadians, okay? Let them have the damn flagpole, okay? Canada, Iceland, Greenland, Denmark, Norway, Finland, Sweden. That is a powerhouse for the new industrial information revolution. And one of the things I am working on is open source everything engineering, which reduces to 10% the cost of anything, from agriculture to energy to housing to health to water. 10%. It eradicates all of the waste. It eradicates all of the life cycle costs. It also puts a lot of contractors out of business. So we're going to need to buy a couple of Caribbean islands where they can be given a very comfortable retirement. We do have to have a truth and reconciliation path for all these people that are going to lose money for doing it wrong, okay? But it's time we do it right. Now, it troubles me quite often to have American military commanders and policymakers assume that just because they've got OSINT in their all-source quiver, that they are, in fact, informed. Let me give you a couple of facts. Google only indexes 4% of the internet. Most of the PDFs that non-government organizations post are not full text online. They're images. They don't have persistent URLs. They are therefore invisible to what is really a very corrupt, mediocre search engine. Google got its start by stealing Yahoo's search engine with funding from CIA, and because HP was stupid and closed down Alta Vista, which was one of the coolest things going at the time. And so Google got a whole flood of really, really great employees, okay? In my view, Google is seriously violating its do no harm mantra. Today, you don't just get a search of 1 million hits. You get a search in which the top 10 someone else has paid for you to see. This is a corruption of the system. So one of the things I would like very much to see is a Nordic intelligence center that joins with Nordic industry to create a Google and Facebook killer. Now here's a deeper look. Of all of the scientific papers written, 1% are published. And we now know from the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine that 50% of the medical papers that are published are full of lies written by the pharmaceutical companies who then paid a doctor to provide their signature. Now think about this a little bit. I actually tried to pitch Elsevier and Thomson Reuters on getting to all knowledge, because in my experience, you have some really wonderful papers that have some errors in them, and you have some really rotten papers that have a couple of gems in there. And so what we want to do is get to a world brain where every paragraph is linkable and peer-reviewed. And so over time, we start to get down to all the graduate students. When I was running a multi-million-dollar company, I would use Citation Analytics to find the top professors in any given topic. But I'd never talk to the professors. They were too arrogant and expensive. I would go to their impoverished graduate students, okay, and get right to the newest information, the newest insights. But it's a way of leveraging the system. Now, on the left, you see the fragmentation of the scientific community. In the United States today, we award PhDs to people who know everything about nothing, okay? It has gotten that bad. And in fact, I've designed a new meta PhD that I would love to create, teach, and earn. I lectured once at the University of Southern Denmark, and I was unsuccessful in connecting with the Technical University here in Copenhagen. But we need a meta PhD that does holistic analytics, true cost economics, and open source everything engineering. It will change the world, in my humble opinion. Now, I was interviewed to be the senior defense leader for HUMINT. They didn't hire me, in part because I think they wanted to have someone who would continue to do HUMINT as usual, which is defense attachés doing spying very badly, and military groups fumbling around. They were not interested in my vision, which was every human being is a source. And there are, in fact, 15 slices of HUMINT, only 4 of which are classified. And you can study this chart later. It's available at tinyurl/steele-HUMINT. Everything I talk about is on Phi Beta Iota, which is my memory bank because I'm an old guy. So everything I talk about is there. Now, here's another way of looking at the centrality of OSINT, and I guess I should have emphasized OSINT is human. OSINT is not TechInt. TechInt is a waste of time and money, by and large. In fact, Steven Dediger from Lund University noticed my first conference in 1992 and invited himself and brought a delegation of Swedish visitors, insisted on being put on the schedule, and how could I say no? And he announced, OSINT is about knowing who knows. And I'll just insert a very quick story here. For the U.S. Southern Command, they needed a Nicaraguan economic study. And they said they weren't happy with what the CIA was providing, and they weren't happy with the prices that the Beltway bandits were suggesting, $250,000 and up. I said, how about, I happen to know the recently retired governor of the Nicaraguan Central Bank, now living in Minnesota. How about I offer him $250 and we ask him to do 4 pages? And we did, and it's the best thing they have ever read on the Nicaraguan economy, and it cost $250 because not only did I know who knows, I'm not a Beltway bandit. Okay? That's OSINT. That's where we need to go. Now, here's another way of looking at the centrality of OSINT, and you can study this later. I cannot overstate the ignorance of the government. The government is the least informed, least competent of the 8 information tribes. Okay? It may have the best of intentions. It certainly should be playing a leadership role. But these are the 8 tribes of information. And we have to unite these tribes. We have to give them tools for sharing information securely, with respect for anonymity and privacy. And we have to be much, much more creative about getting to 100% instead of the 2 to 4% that we're dealing with. Okay? And here's another quick little OSINT story. When we missiled the Libyan military headquarters long ago, the CIA couldn't tell Bill Clinton whether we had hit the target. And so he called the president of CNN, who called the bureau chief in Jordan, who called a news guy who lived across from the street. And the guy said, yeah, you hit it. That's OSINT. Okay? We can do better. Now, I love this slide, which was created by another person, Jan Herring. He was the original NIO, National Intelligence Officer for Science and Technology. And Jan basically created these 4 things, and you can study them later. But the key point here is that we don't do all 4 levels of this. We're stuck down at daily, weekly reports. We're not doing help desk, tell me anything, ask me anything. We're not doing primary research with experts on demand who don't have clearances, aren't citizens, and have actually been in the country that we're trying to study. All right? The United States has over 1,400 Muslim scholars at academic universities. I think CIA talks to 14 of them. The 14 that are US citizens with clearances. Okay? We can do better. Now, this is a standard OSINT cell. 6 people with $1 million is a good start. I'm very concerned about the disconnect. And I want to mention that General Jim Cox, who was the deputy N2 at NATO, Jim is the guy who hired me. They tried to get Alvin Toffler, but he wanted $150,000. And they could get me for $7,500, and Alvin liked me. He wrote a chapter about me called The Future of the Spy. So I briefed NATO. They had me write the NATO OSINT handbook. And Jim sent me, he's now a PhD. I'm not, by the way. I have multiple graduate degrees, but I'm not a PhD. Jim sent me a note in 2013, which you'll find at the tiny URL for this website. I didn't make it into a slide. He basically said, we've done it wrong all these years. He said, what we should have done, we've never made the jump from OSIF to OSINT. What we should be doing is creating an OSINT agency that is co-equal to the signals and human agencies. And I'll tell you what I told Jim Clapper in 2007. If you do OSINT right, it sets the gold standard for what can be known by legal, ethical, inexpensive methods. And it forces the classified disciplines to show their value added. Now, I was a very productive old spy. I had 5 times the regional recruiting record, 5 times the regional production record. One fitness report said I was responsible for 1/3 of 10 case officer stations, reporting and recruiting. I'm a Marine, so I had to sit down and do the math. I think that works out to 1 to 4.5, more or less, okay? I was spending $100,000 a month as a clandestine case officer. Now, I was unusual because of who I was and what I was doing, but $100,000 a month for one guy in one country. Why can't we do that for OSINT? Just $100,000 a month for one country, spread among the analysts that are covering it. We need to seriously, deeply consider the return on investment across the disciplines. This is a quick look, and I only threw this in because I want to make the point that my biggest problem with generals is what they hear from taxi drivers, okay? You need to understand where your general is getting all the baloney, and then you need to counteract that. This is the original graphic from the 1980s, and I guess I must use this laser. If I can figure it out, there we go. 5% of the cost, 80% of the value. 95% of the cost, 20% of the value. Now, of course, I'm only referring to the American system and the British system, and maybe the French and German and Russian systems, and perhaps the Israeli system, but not the Nordic systems, okay? So again, we need to think all this through. We're all good people trapped in a bad system. And those 2 million illegal immigrants are your wake-up call. It's time to listen. It's time to pay attention. It's time to stop doing bad stuff. Now, this is an eye chart. It's out of the NATO OSINT handbook that I wrote. But the key point here is that OSINT is about sources, software, and services. It's not just about surfing the web. And oh, by the way, the only reason they're trying to separate out social media as a separate discipline is because there's one particular guy in the US government that can't make SES unless social media becomes a separate discipline. This is about promoting somebody, okay? This is about creating a new fiefdom, okay? In my personal judgment, in fact, I shared it with my NATO colleague, there's a Dutch teenager that knows more about ISIS and is in direct Twitter contact with more ISIS commanders than the entire US government. Okay? And if you go to Phi Beta Iota and just look up Dutch teenager, you'll find him. I know him. Berto Youngman, who's one of my contributing editors. He was the #2 guy in Dutch military intelligence for OSINT. He introduced us. Okay? We're not leveraging that stuff. This is an even worse slide. In 1997, SOCOM hired me to identify and evaluate all terrorist, insurgent, and opposition websites around the world. And I did that with some help from a colleague in Sweden and a few others. We had cover support plans. OSINT uses cover support plans so that you can have a perfectly legal doctoral student in Minneapolis doing stuff that ends up helping kill people. This is okay, because the two are separate. And oh, by the way, OSINT is not collection, it's acquisition. We settled that in 1997 in the Office of Secretary of Defense. SOCOM went to SecDef and said, we need a ruling. And part of the problem that we have in the OSINT world is we have no collective memory. We have no corporate memory. And part of the reason is no one's been willing to let me help them. You know, I'm sorry, but if you want to get healthy, you're going to have to listen to iconoclasts saying you're doing it wrong. All right? I mean, I don't get paid extra for lying to you. Actually, I do. So it's a conundrum, but I won't lie. So keep your money. We ended up working in 29 languages, including Gaelic and Catalan. And our secret weapon was destitute European graduate students who would kill for $200 for a weekend's work. Okay? So by having a cover support plan and then getting out there to European graduate students who spoke the original languages and then spoke French, German, Russian, or English so that we could get from there to English. We did this in literally 2 weeks, okay, for $60,000. OSINT does not have to be expensive. This is the complicated chart of how to run a proper OSINT operation. Not that anyone here does it improperly. I know you just don't have the resources. But internet stream, commercial online feeds, commercial maps and images, offline stream, gray literature, which is the limited edition local publications stuff, human experts on demand, and circuit riders, eyes and hands-on. I cannot overstress the human aspect of this. Now, I want to go through this very quickly. I was a founding member of the Advanced Information Processing and Analysis Steering Group of the U.S. intelligence community. These requirements for an all-source analytic workstation were defined by Diane Webb and Dennis McCormick and Gordon Oler in 1985. We still don't have them today. And Micah Sifry has written an excellent book called The Big Disconnect, Why the Internet Hasn't Fixed Politics Yet. And it hasn't fixed it because we are a Tower of Babel. We have all these corporations, we have all these activist groups with their own hashtags. Nobody wants to play nice. Nobody wants to do OSINT that can be shared. So I'd like to see you guys take a leadership role. I mean, I hear differing stories on whether the Nordics or Scandinavians play well with one another, depending on how many beers my colleague has had. But I think the reality is you're as good as it gets. The Nordic Scandinavian world is as close as we can get to an honest, competent bunch of people who might be willing to try new ideas. So I dearly hope that this will take root here. I've published a foreword to a book on cyber OSINT by Steve Arnold. I certainly recommend it. It's called Cyber OSINT Next Generation Information Access. These are the 8 areas that feed into the analytic process. And all of these are yellow, if not red. Okay? And I won't go over them in detail because I don't have time. I've been totally intimidated by my handling officer. And that's good. I love people who run on time. This may be the most important slide here. OSINT should receive no less than 5% of the total intelligence budget. 10% would be even better. No less than 5%. In the United States right now, it's about 1% to half of 1%. And it's a joke. What we do for OSINT is a mockery of the term. Human training and conferences everywhere. I mean, I've learned to watch my wallet when I meet a Swedish graduate student. But the reality is the Swedes are doing a very fine job sending graduate students out as collectors. And I think that there is every reason to have a very robust program of inviting people to conferences here and getting to know them legally and ethically and turning them into witting citizen intelligence Minuteman. Now, I have to say very humbly, I furiously object to any use of the term citizen spy. That is not a term you can use and survive in the OSINT world, okay? It's well-intentioned, but it's wrong. OSINT is about legal, ethical, above-board endeavors, all right? And Citizen Intelligence Minuteman, bearing in mind that intelligence is about decision support, not about spying. In the United States, we're proud of spending as much money as possible on technical collection that we do not process. Okay, NSA processes 1% of what it collects. Now, the bad news is that if you become prime minister, they have everything you ever touched, okay? And they let you know that they do. So it's a mixed bag. But the same is true in the private sector. Mary Meeker's 2014 report says that we process less than 1% of the big data that we have. 1%. Okay, so you can kind of see a pattern here. We're working with 1 to 4% of what's available, and generally what we're working with is a tiny sliver of what we could be working with if we were much more effective. And then you have all these other services. So OSINT is human, not techint. And unfortunately, because Jim Clapper was at the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, he chose to make it techint because spending money on technology was something he understood. Not that he's a bad person, but our system is on automatic pilot towards spending money on technology for Beltway bandits, and nobody is held accountable for making a mistake. Bob Gates said this himself on Charlie Rose about 3 weeks ago. Nobody in Washington gets fired for being incompetent. Okay? And this is why I've left Washington. I may seek political exile at some point. I do Windows. Now, some quick case studies. Did I skip a case study? Yes. All right. In 1995, I was asked to be a witness to the Aspen-Brown Commission. And by the way, the Aspen-Brown Commission on Reinventing Intelligence came about because the National Security Act of 1992, which I supported, which would have created an open source agency, was killed by Senator Warner. Senator Warner's words were, right-sizing the intelligence community means downsizing Virginia jobs. It ain't going to happen. And so he stopped intelligence reform, dead, in 1992. And then the Aspen-Brown Commission went through the motions. I was one of the 4 witnesses on OSINT. David Sarnoff Lab, which is funded by the National Reconnaissance Organization, came in and said, we're not sure what OSINT is, but high-definition TV will make it better. And then Tony Lake came in, and he said, well, for me, OSINT is my friends in academia. I give them a call and ask them what they think. He was the National Security Advisor at the time. Then Rand Corporation came in and said, the internet is OSINT, and we know how to make it work for you. And then I came in, and I did my OSINT thing, and I apparently got their attention because General Lou Allen asked me to do an exercise. It was me against the entire U.S. intelligence community over a weekend. This was a Thursday night at 1700. I was going to Las Vegas to speak to DEF CON. The deadline was 10 o'clock on Monday morning. By 10 o'clock on Monday morning, I had identified the top 10 academics on Burundi and Somalia, or Burundi and Rwanda, the top 10 journalists, the tribal orders of battle. Janes, my friend Alfred Rollington, brought an analyst in over the weekend, and he created a tribal order of battle over the weekend, while CIA was still doing uniforms and tanks. We even had it down to the technicals. We had it down to the number of Toyotas these people had, okay? Poll mill overviews from Oxford Analytica, Soviet 1 to 50 combat charts. I helped blow the whistle. We're still using Soviet charts in Somalia, 1 to 100,000 Soviet charts, okay? The shuttle mission was Swiss cheese. And NGA doesn't quite understand that sending 7 laptops to NATO doesn't do it in terms of delivering maps for Bosnia and Kosovo and all this stuff, all right? I'm a Marine Corps infantry officer. If a bullet goes through it, it needs to still work. For me, that means 175 paper maps on the shelf for every battalion, okay? This whole digital thing is out of control. The Chinese can shut us down anytime they want. And my young lieutenants do not know how to do land nav, which is the scariest part of Marine Corps training. And then imagery. Another case study. Now, these are just representative, but I have supported the Special Operations Command in doing denied area cross-border operations. And the fact is, the Russian military maps are still the best maps in the world for everywhere, including Africa, Latin America. They do 1 to 20s for all of the ports. If you want to go in and plant a mine on somebody you're mad at, this is what the Israelis use. So this is out there. And geospatial is really important. Few others, Citation Analytics. I was having a conversation with the chairman of the National Intelligence Council in 1995, 1996, very educated man. Harvard, Rand, he didn't know what Citation Analytics was. I learned what Citation, and I'm not normal, but I learned what Citation Analytics was as a freshman in college. It's a social science citation index, a science citation index. It allows you to tell who cited what going back in time. So if you have an article that you really, really like, it tells you who cited it into the, from the future to within the last 3 months. It also allows you to group people who are respected. The most cited papers, the most cited authors. That's how I get to my graduate students. We don't do that. Not only do we not do that, we do monolingual research. So we do research in English. And maybe, to be really pretentious, we'll have one article in French and one article in German just to pretend that we did multilingual research. The way you do it, obviously, is you need to start doing multilingual authorship, multilingual reading and authorship and working groups and so forth. Now, this is what it looks like when it works. And again, you'll be able to study this, this chart on your own. Let me go back. Islamic finance. I want to make a point here. This Islamic finance thing was done by a very talented commercial intelligence organization that knew that tax records and ownership records were analog. You can't do this cruising the internet. You have to send somebody to the tax office to go through the records. All right, now there was another, I helped create the Scotland Yard OSINT unit, and David Vaness got a knighthood out of it. I got a little decanter of scotch. Good. And the big surprise was not that OSINT was good at putting arms merchants and terrorists in jail faster and better and cheaper. The big surprise was that they increased post-conviction confiscations by 100 times. Because spies don't do real estate. Once someone was convicted, we could go around the world and look for their yachts and their condominiums and their other property holdings. Nobody had ever done that before. So it became a very lucrative return on investment for SO11. I believe that we need a multinational intelligence center that sets the gold standard for integrity. Period. And if my face looks drawn and desperate, it's because you're my last stop. I failed everywhere else. The Swedes had me in country for 15 years, and now they've forgotten everything I taught them. The French had me into the SGDN, but once they figured out I wasn't interested in industrial espionage, they went on to destroy Libya. You know, the Germans, the Israelis, they all have their own thing. If there's one place on this planet where we can plant a seed crystal for OSINT with integrity, I think it's here in Copenhagen. And so I beg of you, please, think about this. My work on the future is at tinyurl.com/Steele-future, and if you go to the 2016-OSINT, then you'll get all these other links active in that full text post online. Now, as I draw to my conclusion, I want to emphasize that one of the things I've learned as a champion of OSINT for 25 years is we don't do counterintelligence right either. And counterintelligence is absolutely essential. If you don't do counterintelligence right, you can't rely on anything else. If you don't have a good grip on your financial, ideological, and religious traitors who are skewing the decision-making inside of your government, not that you have any, but we have a lot, then you've got a problem. So please understand that in my championship of OSINT, I actually feel like the FBI is an abused child locked in the closet with a sock in its mouth. They're not allowed to do their job. They're political theater, by and large. And I absolutely respect and believe that counterintelligence needs just as much emphasis at the national level as OSINT does as we move forward in healing our intelligence with integrity. Now, closing thoughts. Ethics is an operating system. Will and Ariel Durant wrote the 11-volume Lessons of History. I'm going to finish in 1 minute and 14 seconds. And they concluded that morality is a strategic asset of priceless value. The Canadians used to wear the maple leaf. In fact, Americans used to wear the maple leaf when they were backpacking in the Southern Hemisphere in order to get all that goodwill the Canadians had built up. Morality is a very precious asset. Intelligence without integrity is not intelligence. So you can take from that whatever you want in relation to what I think of the U.S. intelligence community. All right? I sent Brennan a note when he was in the White House saying, for God's sakes, whatever you do, close down the drone program. It is absolutely, utterly a crime against humanity to be killing people with drones without legal process. And oh, by the way, out of every 100 we kill, 98 of them are documented innocent men, women, and children. And we wonder where these illegal immigrants and terrorists come from. Okay? OSINT is the foundation for enhancing integrity in all source intelligence in command and in politics. I believe that intelligence is remedial education for policymakers and politicians who haven't read a good book in 20 years. And I think it's vitally important that we take our responsibility as educators as seriously as we take our responsibility as collectors and analysts. Education is our end product. Now, you can't see these, read these, but what I have done is I've created for you an online post, full text online, and all of these links are active there. These are the best of the links. You've got the soft stuff, and I will make a point to you. The NATO and soft documents are severely outdated, and most of the links are broken. Now, I can't wait until March 2018 for doctrine, which will then lead to a NATO working group on OSINT, which might perhaps by the year 2027 produce a working draft that the French will object to, okay? I believe you have the power within 30 to 90 days to create a rewrite of this stuff and set the gold standard. Time is the one strategic variable you cannot buy and cannot replace. I've spent 25 years being a failure. I would like you to spend 25 years being a great success. And I do believe that's the end of my briefing. And here is the tiny URL, 2016-OSINT. And I now stand ready to answer questions if I'm allowed to. And we will videotape the questions, so please use the microphone, and if you're undercover, don't ask a question. I can also tell blonde jokes. I mean, okay. So do you have a question, sir?
No, I just passing out the mic.
Oh, okay. Please ask me at least 3 questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, I'm honored.
I think the main conclusion in my head from your talk, apart from the pleasure of listening to it, was that quite a lot of people have done quite a lot of things they shouldn't have done, or rather have omitted to do things they should have done. Now, I cannot believe they're all bad people.
No, I said good people trapped in a bad system.
And what is it about the system that is so bad?
Money. Really. I mean, you know, I've been technically unemployed since the 1st of January 2008. I've held top secret special compartment and clearances my whole life. And in a security interview, they said, well, we noticed you don't have a lot of foreign contacts listed. And I don't, because in our system, unless you're sleeping with them or taking money from them under the table, you don't list your foreign contacts. And I said, well, tell us about all your foreign contacts. So I listed all 7,500. Think of 3 little chimpanzees jumping up in a very small room. That was my security officers, okay? They took away my clearances, it destroyed my business, and it led to a new life, which is to say I wrote 4 more books. The Open Source Everything Manifesto is now sort of a cult book, and we're off to a good start. I haven't had a lot of money to distract me in all these years. I mean, being unemployed doesn't mean you're without wealth, but the point is, I've been doing what I wanted to do for the right reasons. Money does corrupt. And I believe OSINT's greatest ethical value is that it's not expensive. Therefore, it doesn't attract a snake oil salesman. So I think OSINT is really, really you know, I cry when I watch Schindler's List. I mean, that's a seriously good movie. And there's this one place where the guy holds up the list of the Jews whose names are being put on, and he says, this is an absolute good. OSINT is an absolute good, in part because it's not expensive. And I think ultimately OSINT will educate so that we can get the politicians and the bankers and others. And by the way, I'm huge on truth and reconciliation. Okay, I have absolutely no interest in confiscation, vindictive justice, whatever. I just want them to get out of the way. And I'll make a quick comment. This is very important. Lady Lynn Rothschild sponsored a conference on inclusive capitalism in May of 2014 in London. That's code for stop the pitchforks. I'm worried about the illegal aliens. The Silicon Valley billionaires, the black sheep billionaires, are sponsoring conferences on redemptive capitalism. That's code for stop the pitchforks. I'm worried about the illegal aliens. Okay, and of course you have Trump and Sanders. They're a classic manifestation of a seriously pissed off US public on both the right and the left. We're broken, and money broke us. So I think OSINT is part of the solution. Yes, sir, next question, over here.
Working? I find this to be a key part of, well, I've read the manifesto, and I get this picture of the corrupting power of money, but aren't there people behind this money? So, in effect, there seems to be an overarching thought that if you can get, I'm going to use the word truth here, if you can get the truth out cheap and without secrecy, then the right thing will happen. But all these secrets were created by the same people, I assume, that will be using the new system.
Not necessarily. One of the things that I've noticed is that consumers are really, really ignorant. I mean, they don't know what they're buying. And I've conceptualized, and I briefed this in Ecuador, think of an app in which you scan the barcode of something, and Wired Magazine had this line, so it's not original to me, but you scan the barcode of something and it says, if you eat me, I'll kill you, okay? I think we can change markets overnight. And part of the problem with true cost economics, which is the middle half of my vision, is that the data's not there, okay? We have to be able to show virtual water. I mean, a standard cotton t-shirt, for example, has over 500 gallons of water. Tomatoes instead of beef is 20 gallons versus 5,000 gallons of water. Plastic bottles take more water to make than they contain in water. So what I'm really looking at is a jujitsu kind of system that essentially educates the public. And I've published, if you look up at Phi Beta Iota OSEE, you'll see the article I wrote for the Nordic countries. And in fact, there have been a couple of articles about me in Denmark, in Norway, Steele Goes Nordic, and a couple of others. And what you'll see there is that open source intelligence is 1/10 of the cost, and if we approach this with holistic analytics and true cost economics, we end up eradicating waste. The waste in our Western system is documented as an average of 50%, okay? Whether it's agriculture, from farm to factory to supermarket to house to trash can, 50%. From energy, from the centralized creation point down to the bottom, 50%. Health, Price Waterhouse did a study, 50% of every US dollar is waste, okay? So we have to scrub the waste out of the system, and then we have to start moving toward this open source stuff. I am not a rocket scientist. I don't have all the answers, but I'm pretty sure that because you've done something the rest of the West haven't, you've actually maintained economic justice as much as you might complain about your tax rate. You guys are a real success story from where I sit. And I believe that once someone does it, it's the lifeboat theory of change. Once someone does it and demonstrates its value, it will spread.